Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending where you're joining us from. Welcome to the TechRRT Capacity Strengthening webinar series with Program Spotlights of Multi-Sectoral Integration with IYCF-E. Today's webinar is Integrated Food Security Phase Classification and the Use of IYCF data. Most of us know about Integrated Food Security Phase Classification by its acronym IPC. And today that is going to be the focus of our webinar. Before we start, I'd like to just introduce myself and my colleagues that I'm working with today on the call. My name is Andy Kendall. I'm the TechRRT Program Director. Joining us today is Ben Allen. He's the Deputy TechRRT Program Director. And we also have our presenter, who I will introduce in just a minute, Douglas Jaya Saccharin. Today, unfortunately, we don't have our usual colleague, as he's in a training at the moment, Alessandro Yellomo, who is normally with us. So apologies from him. Okay, as we start, I'll go through what we're going to discuss today. It's nice to see that we've got some of the same people joining. Okay, so today, first we've got the introduction of the webinar quickly. Then we're going to have a very short TechRRT overview. Then we'll go into the main part of the webinar, which is the program spotlight on integration for IYCF data into IPC. And that will be Douglas Jayasekaran, who will be joining us from the IPC Global Support Unit. He is a nutrition specialist for them. Then we have a session on questions and discussion time, and before we wrap up. This is our webinar in total will last an hour and a half maximum. It could be shorter depending on how active the discussion is. So we look for interaction. So please do feel free to add your input as we go. Just a few little points before I start. We will be doing an evaluation of the webinar. Ben will go ahead and share with you the link now. If you can go ahead and open that, it'll open to a web page for SurveyMonkey. The evaluation should take less than 5 minutes. So we appreciate your input. It does help for us to make the webinar series better and bring to you things that are interesting for you. So please do fill that out. As you already know, the webinar will be recorded so that you can see it later. We have all the webinars on the website. We will be sharing the whole series with you at the end of the conclusion of this one today. Once it's posted, we'll share all of them with you. You are on mute. If at the point of time when you want to talk, you feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we will make sure to keep you muted. If you have questions at any point during the webinar, please do feel free to write them in the chat box. Questions or input or comments, all are very welcome. As well, in the chat box, if you can please introduce yourself, including if you haven't already done so, including your name, who you work for, what your position is, and what country you're in. And if you're sharing a computer with more than one person, please make sure to introduce everyone. And with that, I will go on. Thank you. Okay, so the aim of the webinar series in general is to increase integrated programming for IYCF-E, taking advantage of all the opportunities to put mothers and babies at the center of response. For those of you who've joined us on other webinars, I keep on saying that I'm going to add the link, and I finally have done it, for the IYCF Friendly Framework. This is an initiative that was undertaken by UNHCR and Save the Children, and there is a video as well. So there's a document and there's a video, and it's fantastic to watch. So you can have a look at that, and Ben will share that in the chat box now. That is a clickable link, which obviously you can't click on now, but when we share the slides, that will be available. The objectives of the webinar are to present practical examples of how nutrition, and specifically infant and young child feeding and emergencies, has been integrated within other sectors' programming. The idea is to be able to discuss the opportunities and the challenges of doing so that more people feel comfortable to do it and to try, and to reach out if they need some support because they realize there are others out there who have also already given it a shot. Okay, this webinar series is brought to you by Save the Children and the Technical Rapid Response Team. It's an initiative within the Global Technical Assistance Mechanism for Nutrition. It's in close collaboration with the Global Nutrition Cluster and UNICEF. And I want to give a special thanks to Save the Children and the IFE core group because they have been very instrumental in making this webinar series a reality. So quickly, what is the TechRRT? I won't take long with this, as most of you, I think, have heard it already before. The TechRRT stands for Technical Rapid Response Team. It's a technical rapid response mechanism that deploys advisors to support improved nutrition programming, that is, to improve the technical quality and scale reach of response. We are a consortium that was born in August of 2015, so just approaching our 4th birthday. We work in so it's International Medical Corps in the leads, working in close collaboration with Action Against Hunger and Save the Children. We have funding initially from USAID and from USAID. And recently we've had 2 additional donors come on board with Irish Aid and Swedish SIDA. We work in close collaboration with the Global Nutrition Cluster and UNICEF, and we are within the new Global Technical Assistance Mechanism for Nutrition. Just to go back for a second, we are very appreciative of our donors because without our donors, we wouldn't be able to bring events like this to you. So just to emphasize our gratitude to them. Okay, on to today's presenter. Actually, we have one today. It's Douglas Saccharin. He's joining us. He's a public health nutritionist with over 15 years of work experience in health and nutrition programming and development and humanitarian contexts. He's worked both with UN and NGOs. Right now, for the past 5 years, he's working with the IPC in the Global Support Unit. His main responsibilities within IPC are to develop, pilot test, and finalize and implement the Ipc Acute Malnutrition Scale. So anything to do with nutrition, he's your man. So I'm sure Douglas would be happy to answer any questions at any point if you have them. And okay, now before we start, a few small things that I've already mostly mentioned is please do type your questions or comments or input at any time in the chat box. At the end of the presentation, we will go to the questions and discussion section, and we will invite you to ask your question out loud if you're willing and able. If you're shy, we will do that for you, so don't worry. But please do write them down so that we can record the questions. Also, as I mentioned, typing your name, your position, your organization, and the country where you're working in the chat box, as well as for any other people sharing your computer with you. And please fill out the evaluation at the end of the webinar, and there is the link in the chat box. With that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Douglas, to start the presentation. Over to you, Douglas.
Thanks, Andy. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the use of IYCF data in the Ipc Acute Malnutrition Scale. What I will do is I'm going to start first with what Ipc is, and then also about what is Ipc Acute Malnutrition. And then we will talk about how we use the IYCF data in Ipc Acute Malnutrition Scale. Then some challenges and possible solutions. I hope you can see my slides. So IPC stands for Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. And in terms of definition, this is how we define IPC. Is a set of protocols to classify areas or groups based on the severity of food security or acute malnutrition outcomes, identify major contributing factors to food security or malnutrition, and provide actionable knowledge or recommendations to address food insecurity and acute malnutrition. IPC has three distinctive but interrelated classifications to inform food security and nutrition programming or decision making. The first one is called IPC Acute Food Insecurity Scale. The second one is called IPC Acute Malnutrition Scale, and the third one is IPC Chronic Food Insecurity Scale. Most people are more familiar with the IPC Acute Food Insecurity Scale because that involves also the famine classification, famine declaration. But IPC Acute Malnutrition Scale and the Chronic Food Insecurity Scales are relatively also new within the different IPC scales. If you look at the three different scales that we have in IPC at the moment, the IPC Acute Food Insecurity Scales and IPC Acute Malnutrition Scales are more related or interlinked. There is a complementarity between the two, as they both look at short-term food security outcomes and short-term malnutrition outcomes. So wherever possible, we advocate that we do this both analysis at the same time to inform, decision making for food security and malnutrition in a holistic way. Moving on to IPC acute malnutrition. So in line with the definition for IPC in general, IPC acute malnutrition is a set of protocols to classify areas based on the severity of acute malnutrition and identifying major contributing factors to acute malnutrition, and then finally providing actionable knowledge recommendations to address acute malnutrition in the area of analysis. So how does IPC acute malnutrition work? Areas are classified based on the acute malnutrition levels or acute malnutrition outcomes. We look at the prevalence of acute malnutrition among children less than 5 years. This can be either based on weight for height or MUAC. Depending on the indicator, we have different thresholds to classify areas into different severity levels. And then secondly, we identify, after we classified an area, we then go on to identify the major contributing factors to acute malnutrition, why we have high levels of acute malnutrition or why we have low levels of acute malnutrition. In the event that we are having both acute food insecurity and acute malnutrition levels as analysis done at the same time, we also look at if there are areas with high levels of acute food insecurity and low levels of acute malnutrition or vice versa, what could be the possible reasons for this scenario. And then we agree as a group, as an analyst, the severity and magnitude of the acute malnutrition and the possible contributing factors in a consensual way, and this then gets communicated through the IPC communication briefs. We do the whole entire process in collaboration with the in-country nutrition cluster or in-country nutrition sectors. We also, as acute malnutrition is an outcome of various different sectors and sectors, we also work with the WASH clusters, health clusters, and food security clusters whenever we implement IPC acute malnutrition at the country level. In terms of the classification of areas based on the acute malnutrition levels, we use different sources of data. We can get acute malnutrition information from surveys, sentinel sites, or screening. Or specifically MUAC screening. So each of these has a minimum quality criteria. So only data that meets this IPC minimum quality criteria gets included in the IPC analysis and the IPC class. We have, as I mentioned before, we have different thresholds for severity based on severity of acute malnutrition based on weight for height and MUAC. So depending on the information we have, we apply these different thresholds to decide what area is in which severity level. Weight for height based classifications are straightforward. We have mutually exclusive thresholds to classify areas, but when it comes to MUAC, it's a bit complex because we don't have mutually exclusive thresholds. So one single MUAC prevalence can show two possible phases or two possible severity level according to the Ipc acute malnutrition analysis. So then we have to look at, in those situations, the relationship between weight for height and MUAC in that particular context. We also need to take into account contributing factors, and then also, in addition to the prevalence of acute malnutrition based on MUAC, before we make a final statement about the severity of acute malnutrition in that area when it comes to MUAC-based classification. Once we identify the area and the severity of that area, we then go into identifying major contributing factors to acute malnutrition. This is done based on a analytical framework, which is a modified version of the UNICEF conceptual framework on acute malnutrition. We have a list of indicators that have been already identified and included in the framework. So we go through this list of indicators to see, okay, which could be the major, minor, or not a contributing factor to acute malnutrition in each of these areas we classified. We also additionally add other indicators depending on the context, depending on the issues related to that specific context. Then we look at those additional issues also, whether they could be of concern for acute malnutrition in that context or not. Since we have also a specific classification on food insecurity, acute food insecurity to be specific, when it comes to food security related issues that contribute to malnutrition, we always refer to the food security classification, Ipc food security classification, and make conclusions about whether food security is an issue for acute malnutrition or not in that area. As you can see from the analytical framework or the modified version of the UNICEF conceptual framework on acute malnutrition, in terms of IYCF may come in two places. One, as an immediate cause of acute malnutrition when looking at acute malnutrition among children under 5. And also it can come under underlying causes as one of the underlying causes of acute malnutrition. So the indicators we look at under the immediate causes of acute malnutrition with regards to infant and young child feeding are three, mainly: minimum meal frequency, minimum dietary diversity, and minimum acceptable diet. We also consider other indicators depending on the context, but these are the main indicators we look at to say something about the food consumption or immediate causes of acute malnutrition in relation to acute malnutrition. Then when it comes to the underlying causes of acute malnutrition, we look at exclusive breastfeeding, continued breastfeeding, etc. Again, we might add additional indicators based on the context we are doing the analysis. As in IYCF is a key contributing factor, not just in the emergency context, but also in the development context. This is a very important issue to consider, or we consider it as a very important issue in the analysis of in the Ipc acute malnutrition scale. There have been Ipc acute malnutrition has been implemented for the last 2 years. It was conceptualized and pilot tested since 2014, but then it was finalized the full finalized version was started we started the implementation in 2017. So it has been around for the last 2 years, and we have done IPC acute malnutrition analysis in about 15 countries around the world. So there have been several challenges with the use of IYCF data, the quality of the IYCF data. So the major one is the availability of the data across all countries, all these 15 countries where we have done IPC acute malnutrition analysis. So as you know, the main source of IYCF data is the national level surveys, DHS mix type of surveys. So these surveys are implemented only around 3 to 4 years. Whereas the IPC acute malnutrition is conducted more frequently. So in some analysis, we will have data on IYCF if there was a mixed survey or DHS survey, but then in the other analysis, we won't have data, or the data we have on IYCF might be too old to use in the IPC acute malnutrition analysis. Also, in some countries, for example, in Yemen, IYCF data are non-existent because these DHS mixed surveys have not been conducted in the last 3 or 4 years in Yemen. The second challenge is about the availability of data at the unit of analysis, meaning sometimes the data are available, but at a high level, for example, at the regional level or the provincial level. But the IPC analysis is conducted at the district level or a lower level, lower admin level. So it's very difficult to extrapolate these regional level, provincial level, higher admin level data to apply for a lower admin level. That's also a big challenge in many countries. Pakistan, Madagascar, Mozambique, they all have these challenges. Thirdly, we don't have thresholds for any of these IYCF indicators. For example, although we can make some subjective judgment about what is considered to be good breastfeeding practices, what prevalence of exclusive breastfeeding can be considered good, and what could be considered not adequate or low. There is no set thresholds about what is good, what is medium, what is high. So that's kind of a challenge in some context to interpret the data on these IYCF indicators. Sometimes we also have seen reporting issues with data. For example, even though the IYCF indicators have been standardized a long time ago, and there is specific guidelines about how to collect this data, how to report this data, which age group to include in which indicator. Sometimes they are not still very strictly followed. So instead of reporting on minimum dietary diversity, for example, people might report on minimum number of or mean number of food groups consumed. So then again, first of all, there is no thresholds to look at this data objectively, and then also there is no historical data to compare these type of data. So that's another challenge in terms of reporting on these IYCF data. The other challenge is sample size. People do include IYCF information and IYCF indicators in small scale surveys, for example, smart surveys or food security surveys. But then, for some indicators, for example, exclusive breastfeeding and introduction of solid, semi-solid food, etc., it becomes very, very small. And at that level, it's not meaningful to come up with any prevalence for those indicators, but then it's still reported. And people have challenges interpreting those data. The other challenge is about the quality of the data. What do I mean by quality of IYCF data is the information on IYCF, the way it is collected, calculated, example for using the correct age group for each of the indicators, and then reported appropriately. Unfortunately, we don't have any quality check at the moment to see whether it is a good quality data or there is a problem with quality of data. We just take as face value. If the minimum meal frequency is 40%, we don't have any way to verify about the way it was collected or the way it was calculated and presented. We just have to use it as it is. So the next section is about some suggestions to address some of these issues we came across in the Ipc Acute Malnutrition implementation. First of all, there are a lot of smart surveys or small scale, other type of small scale surveys. They can collect some of these, maybe not all of the IYCF indicators, but because of the sample size issues, but some of the indicators can still be collected. So where possible, it's a good idea to include these indicators in those small scale surveys, so information is available for situation analysis, Ipc acute malnutrition analysis. Secondly, we were trying to work with the clusters and the information working groups at the country level to standardize, well, not standardize, but use the standardized way of reporting these indicators, because most of the time the information is there. They would report on, for example, minimum meal frequency and minimum dietary diversity, but not on minimum acceptable diet. So it's just a way of making sure that, whenever information is collected and analyzed, it is reported as per the standard format or standard indicators. Reanalysis of data. For example, when you have regional level or provincial level data, if there is raw data, then we can reanalyze. Where sample size permits, we can recalculate the estimates at the lower level, district level, to then use district based information in the Ipc acute malnutrition analysis. So this is only possible if we can get a hold of the raw data. So that's one possibility to increase the availability of IYCF data. Maybe we could also explore other ways to collect IYCF data that can provide more frequent data for analysis. For example, mobile data collection of IYCF indicators. I know some agencies such as WFP has tried this in some contexts, but if we can find a way to collect this information using mobile platform, then not only we can get more frequent data, but also it will address the sample size issues. We can also look at the seasonality issues, whether there is any seasonality between in terms of these indicators between rainy season and lean season and so on. Then the other issue is to address the quality check or develop some quality check to make sure that the information gathered or reported are of at least meet some basic quality. So we don't just use the face value of the data, but also to look at the quality of the data before we can use it in the analysis. Finally, maybe to combine all these mobile data collection, quality check, and also the issues with the reporting, if there is any kind of software or or automated mechanism that can be developed, then people can use it straightforward. It will be not only standardizing the indicators, but also improve the quality of the IYCF data. I think that's all I had for this, unless there is any question. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you so much, Douglas. That was super interesting. I think there's a lot of great suggestions that you mentioned. I think it's really interesting to see how in the bigger picture of IPC, how in fact IYCF data does come into play and is used at that level, and maybe something that people don't necessarily realize. And one of the reasons it's been interesting for us to share that with everyone. Okay, with that, I will hand over to Ben, who will manage, sorry, hang on just one second. There we go. Hand over to Ben, who will manage the questions and answer session.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Douglas. We have one question to get us started. I believe that is Tomomi from the UNICEF MENA office. Tomomi, would you like to say your question?
Sure. Hope you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so I may be misunderstanding, but I think in the presentation you have mentioned that you don't have the set threshold. I am wondering whether it would be possible to set the threshold once you have data accumulated from different parts of the world in the long run, or is it just impossible because the countries and regions are too diverse? Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, Douglas.
Sorry, should I answer or we should?
Yes, please, just go ahead. We have only got the one question at the moment, so I'll take that opportunity to encourage everybody else to come forward with any questions they have. Thanks, Douglas.
Okay, so I mean, I don't know the answer, but you know, these are just some challenges we face in the field that I reported. We have been in touch with some global experts on IYCF about this. So maybe this is one of the ways we can develop some thresholds in the future. But you know, we at IPC we don't have this capacity or luxury to engage in this. But we are engaging with other experts to see how this can be done. Over.
Yeah, Douglas, and on that, another question just come in. What evidence do you think that you would need in order to set these thresholds? Is there a vision or an understanding of what the requirement might be?
Yes, for example, you know, for some indicators, for example, water or anemia or vitamin A or those kind of indicators, we have globally agreed thresholds. For example, what is a public health emergency for anemia, for example, right? So that type of thresholds or agreed thresholds don't exist for IYCF. So even for vaccinations, you see, even though it's not available at the global level, but countries have their own thresholds, what they think is good enough or something. So that type of thresholds is what missing for IYCF. Over.
Thank you. Saeed Rahman from REACH. I hope you'll excuse me for answering your question. Do you have any follow-up comments? Yes, you do. Would you like to ask your second question?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So I was just
Thanks.
wondering, given the IYCF data available now in some contexts, like in South Sudan, I know we get it from FSNMS twice a year. So maybe we can at least see some trends. How can that be used to inform how we classify areas for IPC, or how can we use classifications for the coming season?
Yeah, sorry. So when we have IYCF information, especially biannually, where we do use it in both current classification and also in projection analysis. It's very, especially in South Sudan, where you have this information to look at different seasons and so on. So it really helps the projection analysis. Also, not just the current analysis and the contributing factors. Yes, it's true. Over.
Okay, thank you. Saeed, please feel free to respond if you wish. Okay, great. Well, we again, I encourage you to come forward with your questions and put them in the chat box. Whilst they're coming, I'm going to put forward Andy's question, Douglas, she says, is there any example of a country that is collecting data well, or where IYCF data is being well integrated into the analysis? For a best practice example.
Yes, so unfortunately, most countries still rely on these big national level surveys for IYCF data. But in some countries, as I said, before, some of these indicators have been integrated into small scale surveys. So one such example is Kenya. So Kenya, yes, they do collect this list of whole list of IYCF indicators in their DHS mix when they have them. But then they also have these periodic smart surveys that are done in specific locations. So this they have already, through their information working group, agreed which indicators will be included in these small scale surveys, and they do collect them on a regular basis. So it's very helpful for the IPC acute malnutrition analysis when we do them, when we have them in Kenya. Also South Sudan, when they have FSNMS data, they have at least some of the IYCF data. So that's another place where we do have this information. Over. Okay,
great. Thank you, Douglas. So Kenya and South Sudan, good examples of IYCF data being used in analysis. In the absence of any further questions, I have a couple really. So if I may ask, so you mentioned in regards to the MUAC-based classification that you consider contributing factors. I was wondering what sort of contributing factors they were. And also, I wanted, just more generally, wanted to ask what challenges you come across with using MUAC and weight for height together.
Okay, so first questions about contributing factors we look at when we do MUAC-based classification is, first of all, we get into this contributing factors when we come to MUAC-based classification. The reason is because we don't have solid thresholds for MUAC as we do for weight for height. So when you see, okay, the MUAC prevalence is 8.3% in one Payam or one county in South Sudan, whether, before we make a statement about the severity level, we have to look at other issues such as diseases, if there is any disease, or what is the food security situation in that area, what are the conflict situation or access issues in those areas. So these are some of the issues we look at before we decide on, okay, the 8.3% is for this area, given this situation is relatively low or relatively high, then we finalize our classification. So Yeah, so those are the main issues we look at: food security, access issues or conflict, other other issues, and then disease patterns. And so these are the main contributing factors we look at. In terms of the challenges we face in terms of using weight for height and MUAC, well, when we have weight for height, and if we have weight for height and MUAC, we mainly go with the weight for height. The reason is, it's more or less standardized and we have better thresholds for weight for height. So MUAC we consider only in the absence of weight for height. But then we do need some weight for height and MUAC data to look at the relationship between weight for height and MUAC. So, depending on the population, depending on the region, MUAC may be higher than weight for height, or MUAC can be lower than weight for height. For that reason, we do look at the relationship between these two. So oftentimes what we find is we don't have enough data to look at the relationship between weight for height and MUAC to inform the MUAC-based classification. Or even when there is data on MUAC and weight for height, MUAC data are often of very poor quality, and so it's very difficult to come up with the a concrete relationship in that context. So that's the main problem we face. Over.
Great. So that's interesting. So you find more data quality problems with MUAC measurements than you do with weight for height?
Yes, that's true. And part of the reason is, we do have good quality checks, relatively good quality checks for weight for height, but not for MUAC. And also MUAC is kind of treated as a I don't know if I can say quick and dirty assessment or quick and dirty data. So people don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to MUAC data as they do with the weight for height. So because of all these things, often we get very poor quality MUAC data.
Great, and just referring to a question I had, but also Andy is having as well. So you say that you use weight for height in all cases, but MUAC only in some cases when data quality is appropriate. But as Andy says, MUAC and weight for height show different things, and this evidence is getting stronger. So will you be adapting that in the future to include MUAC on a more systematic basis? Or?
Yes, exactly. So the vision within IPC is that going forward, we would ideally have one thresholds, combined thresholds for both weight for height and MUAC, because we have recognized both weight for height and MUAC as signs of, or low weight for height or low MUAC as signs of acute malnutrition. So we already advocate for the combined estimates, combined caseload calculation, combined analysis of weight for height and MUAC. But at this particular time, since we don't have enough data or enough evidence to come up with the one thresholds for these combined weight for height and MUAC estimate, we are using weight for height and MUAC independently. But going forward, we hope to come up with one thresholds that includes both weight for height and MUAC. Then we can have that. Over.
Okay, great. Thank you, Douglas. Maybe we have a question from, excuse me if I get your name wrong based on your username, but from Jung-Kun Lee. Are you there, and can you present Douglas with your question?
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, so you pronounced my name correctly. Yeah, this is John from WFP. So I have a question related to the IYCF data collected from the mobile, or what we call distance survey. So is there any other country currently using this IYCF data collected from distance survey, like in IPC acute malnutrition analysis? Thank you. Over.
No, we don't have. We haven't used this in IPC acute malnutrition because it doesn't. We didn't see this in any of the countries where we did IPC acute malnutrition, but I think the idea we were proposing before was kind of, before we start using this MWAM data, we need to do some prep work, right? Because we don't have any solid research on whether MWAM data or IYCF data collected through MWAM or mobile data is as good as the survey data. So, that has to be done first before we can accept or we can start using mobile data in IPC acute or any other program. So I know WFP did some work on this in Kenya a couple of years ago maybe, but so we need to. The proposal is to look at this as a way to increase the data availability on availability on IYCF, and then this also will then address a lot of other issues like sample size, quality, and so on. Over.
Thank you, Douglas. Junkan, would you like? Do you have anything to respond, or otherwise we'll move on to a next question? Hello. No. Okay.
Yes, I'm done.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah. No. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Okay, great. Thank you. Saeed Rahman, can we go back to you for your most recent question?
Sure. I think it's similar to the one Suzanne just wrote, or it's related. Just in your experience, how would we really use, and if it's different than Suzanne, sorry, but how would we really use IYCF data? Like we can classify different factors as major or minor or not a factor, but how, in your experience, how do you know when IYCF is majorly contributing to acute malnutrition, or is only a minor contributor in relation to other things like food security and WASH and?
Okay, so the Ipc Acute Malnutrition Scale as a scale is a classification of acute malnutrition. So we do the classification based on the level of acute malnutrition. But then we do go and look at the what we call contributing factors to acute malnutrition, and that's when the diseases and IYCF and all the other rest of the data indicators come in. So yes, so we don't include these contributing factors in the classification, but the contributing factors are kind of a narrative to tell the full story about why we have phase 4 or phase 3 acute malnutrition, how we explain this level of acute malnutrition. And secondly, about acute malnutrition, IYCF contributing to acute malnutrition. In every single country where we have done IPC acute malnutrition, if not the quantity, but the quality of the food is always of concern. We have countries where you have, minimum dietary diversity or minimum dietary diversity being 0.5% or 1% even. So that's across the board is a major problem. It's not just in emergency countries, but also in countries considered to be in development context. Okay, over.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Great, thanks, Douglas. And I'm not sure, have I missed any questions? Andy, yes, I think we jumped your question. Would you like to ask that one related to the complications?
Sorry, hang on. Oh yeah, okay. I wanted to ask, when you have, when the data is good, how complicated is it to actually include the IYCF data in the collective analysis?
Well, when we have IYCF data, then we just include it. It's not, as long as the group agrees that at least the big picture about we are not calculating this based on 5 kids or 4 kids, and so on. If those things are okay, since we don't have detailed quality check for IYCF, those big parameters are okay, then we do include them in the analysis. So there's no nothing else prevents from these data being included in the analysis. I don't know if that's what you were asking.
Yeah, I guess to some extent you sort of answered it a minute ago, because you mentioned that it kind of is the backdrop for the situation that tells the story behind. So it's more so, I guess it's more so used in that way, that you'll be looking at that data just to kind of make the picture clearer, so to speak. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Ben, did you want to go to Suzanne?
Yes, Suzanne. So yeah, before I have another question, but it's kind of slightly changing the course of the discussion a little bit. So Suzanne, would you like to add? We touched upon your question a bit. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think you pretty much answered it in the last couple of questions. Yeah, in my understanding, it's not like if we found that IYCF indicators were super poor, would that be something that would change the way we classify a situation? But I think, like Andy just said, it more or less gives the context to what's happening, unless I'm misunderstanding.
Right. Just to also clarify on that, so when I say, we give the narrative with these additional contributing factors when we do the classification, I'm talking about the current classification. So where we are, we classify where we are now. We are in phase 1 of IPC, or phase 2 of IPC, or phase 5 of IPC, and this is the story with contributing factors at the moment. But then we also do a projection analysis or projection statement, where if we think that IYCF or diseases or conflict or food security, they're all going to change, and they're going to deteriorate in the future, then we also take that into account in the projection classification. So you may be in phase 2 for the current classification, but if all these indicators are going to get worse in the projection period, then you might classify the area in the projection period into phase 3 or phase 4. That they do get included in the projection analysis. The reason we don't take into account in these additional indicators in the current classification is, one, we are, as I said, we are talking about Ipc acute malnutrition is the classification of acute malnutrition, right? And then secondly, acute malnutrition at the current level, current situation is an outcome of poor IYCF, so poor disease or high level of diseases and so on. So kind of they are already taken into account when it comes to the current situation. So that's other reason we don't, again, include the additional indicators in the current classification. Over.
Okay, thanks. That clarifies.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Douglas. We have a comment from Mathieu, and if you don't mind, Mathieu, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I have a question for you, Douglas. This webinar series is all about integration of IYCF into programming, whether it's nutrition, assessment, or other sectors. And you mentioned, Douglas, that you often work with other clusters with the Ipc Acute Malnutrition scale. And I was just wanted to ask you whether what challenges, and if you have any comments about how integrating and how working with other clusters has been, and yeah, just some comment on that.
Sure. So IPC is a situation analysis tool, right? So it helps you, classify areas and then also pick up on what are the major issues related to food security or food nutrition in that area. So this then inform program, or what we call the response analysis. So in an ideal situation, what happens is that we do the IPC analysis and we classify the areas, we identify the major contributing factors, and then we come up with our recommendations. This then goes to the nutrition cluster or nutrition sector for the response analysis, and then that will lead to program design and implementation. At the same time, when we come across issues with data quality or anything to do with assessments, then it goes to the assessment working group, if that exists in the country, to see if we can modify some of the ways in which the information is collected to improve the analysis for the next round of IPC. So one specific example I can give you is Kenya. So we've been working in Kenya for a long time. We started the Ipc Acute Malnutrition pilot, the first pilot there. So at the beginning, when we were looking at the available data, we had surveys done throughout the year. For example, some surveys in January, another in March, and another in July, and so on. So it was not possible to do a season-based analysis with these different data coming from different period of the different seasons of the year. So after that, after some time, now it's been synchronized. So there is a season. They integrated all these assessments with the season based on the season. So the data now that is available is from the same season. So when you do the IPC for that particular season, we have data specific to that season. So it's much more useful, or much more informative to do this analysis now. So yeah, so IPC informs both response analysis and programming, IPC findings, plus IPC also informs on the assessment part of the program cycle, I guess. Over.
Okay, thank you, Douglas. I wonder, just going back to my question, I wonder whether you can tell us more about the particular clusters that you've worked with maybe you can give some examples of countries, and how that dynamic has been, how that dynamic has worked out with the other clusters. As we all know, that often working across sectors and across clusters can be challenging. So it'd be interesting to hear your views on that.
Yes, I agree. It's very difficult. We've had, I wouldn't say we have been successful in integrating different sectors in the in the analysis. Food security for sure is fully involved in the analysis because, you know, often or most of the time we do combined analysis, food security and nutrition. So that's taken care of. Health is in some cases is involved, but WASH and other sectors are more challenging to integrate. But yeah, it also, you know, not the first time, not the second time, but maybe the fifth time or sixth time when we run the IPC analysis in a country, we get more participation from other sectors. So it takes time to you know to increase the participation and from with other sectors. Over.
Okay, thank you. So unless any other participant comes up with any other questions, I'm going to ask, I'm going to refer to a couple of comments one from Andy and one from Mathieu, both related to what we need to do. Mathieu specifically referring to data quality in order to improve the approach. But I wonder if you've already touched on some in your presentation. I wonder if you could highlight the key things that need to be done to improve the integration of IYCF data into the acute malnutrition scale.
Yes, so I would say, you know, first the more and more countries now have the nutrition information working group, or in different names, but they exist in many countries. So as a starting point, they could review what IYCF data is collected, whether they are collected based on the, you know, standardized way, or they are reporting on a different issues. And then if there is opportunities to include IYCF data in the ongoing assessments. We are not asking for, you know, a comprehensive IYCF assessment, but at least some key indicators can be, if possible, included in the ongoing assessments, like surveys that they already do. And then I think there also needs to be some capacity building on the way the calculations are done for IYCF indicators. Because for weight for height, MUAC and other stuff, you know, you click a button and you get plausibility check, you click a button, you get the results. But IYCF is not like that. A lot of people are using Excels, and also the indicators change from different age groups to different age groups. So it's a bit difficult. So that's another thing to keep in mind and improve when it comes to IYCF data analysis and reporting. After that, you know, it's again, as I mentioned, for me, mobile data collection is one potential option. It will address a lot of issues, but before we move there's a lot of research that needs to be done to say, okay, the data you collect in these mobile devices or mobile technology is as good as the one you collect in a gold standard survey. So that needs to be done before we start about using this. But I think there's a potential. So those are some of my thinking. Over.
Thank you, Douglas. Yeah, it appears that there's some quite concrete actions that could be taken, as you just mentioned, particularly in regards to thresholds and standardization of indicators and IYCF software, essentially. I wonder whether this is something IPC is looking to take forward, or it's something that needs a more collective approach. and maybe, yeah, and so I wonder how and what channels are most appropriate to act on these things.
I think it's more of a collective effort. IPC for sure doesn't have the capacity or expertise in this field to engage, but you know, there are other forums that exist, like IFE group or you know, the cluster or other mechanisms. So I think it has to be done through that channel. So yeah, we are not in IPC going to work on this, but these are some suggestions based on the challenges we face in the field. Over.
Great. Yeah, I wonder if anybody else has any input into how and in what way these areas could be worked on, as Douglas say, in a collaborative manner.
Could I jump in for a second?
Please do.
Okay, wonderful. I find it really interesting, and I think that, Douglas, you've highlighted very, very well some of the issues that we've had in the nutrition community in general and have been trying to work on. It's really a shame that we don't have Alex here with us today, because I think he would be able to talk a little bit more to what work is currently ongoing in terms of some of the areas that need to be strengthened to be able to improve how well we can incorporate IYCF data into IPC analysis. But I do believe that there's work being done on helping to standardize some of the indicators and potentially in software. I think these are issues that have been seen for a long time to be challenges that need to be overcome, particularly as you mentioned about how we analyze the data coming out of the indicators that are collected, and that it's not that simple to even do that analysis. And perhaps it would be a good way forward to develop some tools to make it so that it can be done automatically if you've got the right data going into it. So I would like, yeah, I'm not sure if anybody else on the call has information on what the IFE core group is working on at the moment. But I definitely think that at the end of this webinar, we'll be able to make sure to share with them the recording so that we can hopefully try to push some of this forward a little bit more. Is there anybody on the call who's aware of what's going on within the IFE core group and what they're starting to work on?
I don't have specific details, but it's as you said, a number of these issues are being looked at. Whether or not there's concrete next steps in place, I don't have the details on that. But it's also something to share with the assessment working group, with the new TEP and GTAM, etc.
Yeah, that was exact. Thank you, Suzanne. That's actually the point where I was just thinking about going to. It's for the global technical mechanism sorry, I don't even know what it's called, GTAM, Global Technical Assistance Mechanism for Nutrition. There's been a newly established global thematic working groups, and there's one which is actually being managed by the IFE core group, which is the one on infant and young child feeding in emergencies. But there's also the one that's been established for Nutrition and Information System Global Thematic Working Group. And it really is one of the things that's been highlighted as a priority area for them to work on is around IYCF assessment. And so I know that at least the information system, Nutrition Information System Global Thematic Working Group has that as one of their priorities. And I know that they need to work on it with the IFE core group. And so, and that was talking more broadly about IYCF assessment. And so I think that part of that is going to try to hopefully come out with some standardized ways and standardized tools to be able to use. So yes, thank you, Suzanne, for raising the GTAM. It's a very appropriate place for these to get moved.
Sure.
Great, thank you, Andy, Suzanne, and Douglas. And thank you everybody for your questions. Clearly lots of interesting work going on in this regard and lots more to be done. So I thank you all for your participation. I'm now going to hand over to Andy to close.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you, Douglas, and thank you, everyone, for all your questions. I think that our webinar timing and it being in August has not been in our favor in terms of discussion. Obviously, we've had a good discussion today, but we've had less participants than actually had anticipated coming. So I think we would have had probably many more questions coming in. In any case, I think it's been very fruitful. I am very keen to see some of this moving forward. I think it's very timely, as I mentioned, that the GTAM is looking at working on helping to improve IYCF assessment, and that goes very well in line with some of your suggestions, Douglas, about trying to include more IYCF assessment in small-scale surveys, trying to establish more standardized indicators and the ways of reporting them, trying to ensure that those that information has some quality checks being done on it, and hopefully some software to support the analysis. There's the kind of brainstorming that needs to take place around how to more frequently collect the data, also keeping in mind that sample sizes need to be sufficient. And finally, the part that additional data analysis can be done on data as long as data sets are available. I think all of those are very clear suggestions on ways to improve what's coming out of the nutrition community to support the greater goods in terms of analysis of what's the situation on the ground for conflict and my words aren't coming right now. Communities that have been affected by conflict as well as natural disasters and other situations, let's say. And so I think that the topic that you've covered today really emphasizes sort of a different direction of integration than what we've been touching upon so far. I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm still wrapping up, but what I want to emphasize is that we've had webinars over the past few weeks that covered numerous different topics. And these different topics are shown on this slide today, which is actually the initial invitation, so I'm sure most of you have seen it. But what I would like to just kind of emphasize is that each of these has emphasized a different component that we can think about how to integrate into programming. So our first one was on integration of family planning services with mother and baby areas, and that was in Cox's Bazar. It was an interesting discussion which looked at co-locating services together and to be able to do some small training of the different teams that are located in the same place to better refer users of the services from one thing to the other. It's a simple, low input way to have integration of activities. The second one that we had was was baby-friendly spaces that linked mental health and psychosocial support in CAR, in Central African Republic. That was presented, the first one was presented by Save the Children. The second one was presented by Action Against Hunger. And that was interesting in that it was more human resource intense, and that it needed to have teams of people who were trained well in psychosocial support. Let's say I would say that they were trained in mental health, but that they were really trying to take a public health perspective to try to make sure that the training didn't have to be to such a high level. We're talking about CAR, where levels of education are not necessarily excessive. And so you had to take advantage of, if I remember correctly, she said people who finished secondary school to be able to train them in some basic psychosocial support that was affecting bigger numbers of people in the population. And that was actually linked in the baby-friendly spaces where women with young children and babies were coming to receive support for infant and child feeding, and they were able to address some of their psychosocial support needs to help overcome some of their issues, to help them better care for their babies. The third one was it was given by the World Food Program, and that was on general food assistance. On here it says general food distribution. It was general food assistance in the form of cash, and how it integrated IYCF-E in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This was interesting in that it's something that touches on a large number of population. So it's really key idea on how you can integrate in any type of programming that really reaches great numbers in a simple way. It really looked at passing messages, some key messages. It looked at using some simple rapid assessments of mother-baby pairs and being able to refer them. Again, it was low input, and it was around increasing referrals to services that existed, and just thinking about some simple ways, some simple things that help mothers with young babies in some of our programming. And then today's webinar, where we actually look at how, if nutrition can push forward our game in data collection for IYCF data, that we could probably be able to increase how it's used in some multi-sectoral analysis. These are things I think in general that the nutrition community wants to do anyway, and maybe this gives us that extra push to say, yes, if we do this, it's not just for us. In fact, it's for everyone, and we need to do better. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up, unless anybody has any additional inputs from any of that. Douglas has added to feel free to get in touch with him. He's added his email address there. Of course, we can also put you in touch with him if you so wish. There's no problem with that. We will be sharing all the webinars, the recordings from the last from the whole series in the coming couple of days. We do have the evaluation that we ask for you to fill out, please. Ben will share it again with you right now so that you can do it as soon as we finish now. We want to take the time to thank Douglas for his presentation today, which was very interesting. I think demonstrated how we can all participate a little bit more, to just go that extra mile to really get some improved data collection out there, and for us in each of our individual roles to take those opportunities to move it forward. I also wanted to thank all the participants who are here today, as well as have participated in the other webinars. We really appreciated having you and all the active participation. And we do hope to continue this webinar series in the fall when we collect a few more examples. So if you do know of some good examples, please do pass them on to us so that we can follow up and see if we can add a couple more webinars on integration possibilities to spotlight specific programs that are in the process. With that, does anybody have any additional points they want to raise? Feel free to just jump in now. And if not, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you everyone for your participation, and I wish you a wonderful summer. We'll see you again in the fall. We have another webinar series that will be coming up on that will be looking at programming for non-breastfed infants. So watch your emails for invitations and save the dates for those. And otherwise, I thank you, and I hope you have a great day or afternoon, evening, depending where you are. Thank you so much. We are happy to hear your voices, so feel free to say anything as well. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.